Before we get started, I want to let you know that the only reason I use note cards is just to see what I'm going to say next. So, uh, and really, because there's so much that I could share, uh, I wanted to pick some particular things that would be worthwhile. Well, greetings to whoever's out there. My name is Ken Leary. Uh, I'll soon be 82 years on this planet as a stranger and pilgrim, and looking forward to my real home in heaven with our Lord Jesus Christ. This is a story about a sovereign, compassionate God who invaded the life of a young, lonely, shy, sickly boy. And of course, that boy was me. In fact, he invaded my life before my birth. My mother was having a very difficult pregnancy, and my dad was told by the doctor, I can save one, but not the other. And so, of course, he picked my mom, and I drew the short straw, but here I am. At 18 months, I fell out of my high chair. I developed a bad hernia, which they repaired, and while doing so, they discovered my appendix were about to burst, which in that day would have been fatal. But here I am again, and so on. I've been through a lot of surgeries, and God has brought me through faithfully for whatever purpose. But like I said, here I am because of the great I am. Growing up, I was very lonely and shy, and my mom encouraged me to play with the boys on the street behind that I did not know. Well, God sovereignly led me over to this group of boys who were basically pretty good boys. You know, we did our mischief and whatnot, but it was a great positive influence. And if they had been otherwise, I would have been right in the middle of whatever they were doing. And I'm very thankful for the friendship of these guys that we've kept in touch with over the years, somewhat real pals. And that was a significant factor in my life. We went to church together, was sent there, and was influenced in spite of ourselves. Sports was a big part of my life. I was pretty good at three basic sports, and that was rewarding to me. I was very shy around girls and adults, and I liked the girls, but very insecure about a relationship with one. You know, when I've ministered at the prisons and wherever, I've always talked about this principle. You hang around with good people and good things happen. As Proverbs 13:20 says, he that walks with wise men shall be wise, but a companion of fools shall be destroyed. At 12 years old in Sunday school, we after having terrorized a number of elderly ladies, we got a new Sunday school teacher who was a customs agent. And he was one of those guys that when he walked in the room, everybody shapes up. And so we did listen to him, and he had some exciting stories to tell us. And as a result of his ministry and just God's intervention, one day at Sunday school, God showed his presence to me. I didn't know what was going on, but he spoke to my heart, and I didn't know what he was saying exactly, but I can remember in my heart saying, Lord, I don't know what's going on here, but whatever you want from me, you got it. And whether that was the beginning of God invading my life, or whether it was a real regeneration experience, I'm not sure. But it was at least the beginning of God wooing me to himself. As a result of knowing these guys on the street behind and hanging out with them over there, I found out that they had been to a Bible camp, and it was great. Sports, girls, whatever you'd want. And it sounded great, so I asked my parents, and so the next 4 summers I got to go to camp, this Bible camp, and it was heaven on earth for me. Just God touched my heart in so many ways, and brought me out of some of my shyness, and But the problem was I couldn't bring it home. After a few days or weeks at home, it was back to the same old, same old. Not involved in heavy crime or anything, but just forgetting the Lord and leaving Him out of decisions. After we kind of parted our ways, as we went to different schools and whatever, a new set of friends who were less positive, but still not a terribly bad influence. A man from our church, a multimillionaire, built a community center when I was probably 13, and that's where I hung out. Good, positive place, sports. And after graduating from high school, I had the opportunity to go to work there. Well, that was my perfect job back then. Refereeing, playing ball, lifeguarding, just the whole thing. And all ages, we had preschoolers, elementary school, junior high, high school, adults, seniors. So I got to know just a large number of people in the community, and it was a true community. And that was just a wonderful experience until Uncle Sam sent me a letter making me an offer I couldn't refuse. So I was drafted, went to basic training, and from there you had no choice then, and they sent me to Fort Gordon, South Carolina, and put me through military police training. Was assigned to Fort Belvoir, Virginia, which was 90 miles from my parents who lived in Richmond, and Belvoir is just short distance out of Washington, D.C. So the MP duty was pretty boring, not much went on, pretty quiet post, lousy hours, and just a number of young men who just wanted to have that power and authority, and I just didn't like that atmosphere. From time to time, I would pull duty as a security guard at the engineer school, and it was the munitions section. And so it was a secret thing, and so I would stay at the guardhouse and swap badges, and kind of like they do at the prison. And Lieutenant Jim Bruno would stop and talk with me. He'd get there early every morning and chat with me for a few minutes. So one morning he came in and he said, "Man, we're really short-staffed in there." He said, "Why don't you come to work for me?" And I think it was an off-the-cuff comment, but I jumped all over it. I said, "Are you serious?" And so from that came an interview with the major. So I go in with the major, and he says, "Do you have any college?" I said, "No, sir." He said, "Do you have any background in ordnance or engineering?" And I said again, "No, sir." So he said, "Do you think you could get up in front of a bunch of NCOs and officers and teach a class?" And I just thought, no, but I knew the right answer. I said, "Yes, sir." And so, okay, he said, "If you get away from the MP company, you got a job." Well, I went back to the barracks, all elated, telling the guys, and they laughed at me. "Nobody gets out of this company. We've seen guys go, nobody gets out of this company." So I went to the first sergeant and explained the deal. He said, "I'll talk with the old man, get back with you tomorrow." Came back, he said, "You're free to go." So I show up at the munitions section. I find out they have one side is the conventional demolitions that the Corps of Engineers does, and on the other side was atomic demolitions, where the Corps of Engineers used nuclear devices for demolition purposes, bridges, dams, small things without destroying the countryside, just do with simple demolition, but something that would be too complex for conventional. So I didn't know all that at the time. So I said, "What do you want me to do?" I told him that I was ready to do anything. He said, "We'll make you an instructor." I said, "Well, how do we do that?" He said, "Well, we send you to school." So they sent me to a instructor school, which was very difficult for me, being shy and didn't know what I'd be teaching hardly. So they gave me a little book to use, and so I got through that. Came back and said, "Well, I'm certified as an instructor." what do I instruct? And he said, atomic demolitions. And I said, what's that? And so they sent me to school, their school, as a pupil, student, and went through that and then began teaching. It was a great atmosphere. I mean, I was the only guy in there without a stripe on my sleeve, and these guys were master sergeants and officers, but it was a civilian type environment, and so I was well accepted and coached, and I would have stayed in the Army if they had promised me that job, but I saw these other guys being shipped out here and there, and so I got out of the Army and knocked around a couple of jobs and ended up getting a job at the Naval Shipyard as an apprentice sheet metal worker. And the idea was to train younger guys to be supervisors down the road. So we would work for 3 weeks of the month in different departments of the shop and on the waterfront on the ships, and 1 week in school. Well, I had met a young lady. My brother was in the hospital with a kidney stone, and one of the girls that was training to be a nurse was on his floor, and he was trying to fix me up with her. So I asked her out, and she said, well, you can take me to church. So it was the church I had grown up in and gotten away from. So I got back in church because of a girl, as many guys did, and God began to soften my heart toward the things of God again. So there I met a Coast Guard officer, Bob Blackburn, and he began to invite me to a Friday Bible study. Well, that was the only time I got to date my girl, and it worked. A guy named Bill Gale invited me to a Bible study. So I think, what are all these Bible studies going on? So anyway, it turned out it was the same Bible study. So one date night, she was not available, and you're a young guy, what am I going to do? You got to do something. So I thought, I'll try this Bible study, but it was at a guy's house, and I thought, that sounds weird to me, I was an old church boy, and I thought, something weird, they'd be flopping around on the floor or something. And, but I thought, I'm a big guy, if I don't like it, I can always get up and leave. So I went, and this was a Navigator home, and they ministered to servicemen primarily. But I went, and I thought, this is it. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I saw guys that meant business for Jesus and were investing their lives in being prepared to serve. And I jumped all over that, began to learn how to study the Bible, memorize Scripture, and after some months was invited to come and live in the Navigator home. Great experience. It was a demanding schedule. You worked full time, and then every night there was something going on, going out to one of the naval bases and doing evangelism, just having Bible study, going to the Navy YMCA with an evangelistic meeting, went to an evangelistic Sunday school meeting at the YMCA, the Navy Y, where the mayor of South Norfolk would teach a Sunday school lesson and then would give an invitation. We would zero in on the guys who responded and invite them to church, and then go back to the Navigator home for lunch, and then maybe play a tape, Christian tape on evangelism. Sunday night back out to the base for evangelism. It was a pretty heavy pace, and I kind of burned the candle at both ends, and my health broke down. As a result, I lost my job, didn't have a paycheck, lost my car. I'd already lost my girl, so I could go to this training. So it was like a country music song, and but I was happy to do it. And but anyway, the Navigator and his wife went out to Colorado Springs to the headquarters of the Navigators for a conference. And they said, why don't you come along? This Colorado climate would be perfect for you. And you can kind of regain your strength. So that was a plan. But while I was going to officially resign my job, I had no car anymore, so I had to take a bus and transfer and go across the river and get on another bus and transfer downtown. And so while I was doing this, I was reviewing my scripture memory cards. And one of them that I had memorized was Isaiah 40:31. But he that waiteth on the Lord shall renew his strength. He shall mount up with wings as eagles. He shall walk and not be weary, and run and not faint. As I reviewed that verse, it just jumped off the card at me. And I knew God was promising me he was going to do something for me. So I went to Colorado. Second or third day there, a guy came up to me and said, I'm the director of the boys camp. It's up the canyon here, 20 miles or so, and I've heard that you've worked with kids before. And I said, yeah. Long story short, I went up there to boys camp. And again, bingo, just a wonderful experience, fresh air, good food, regular schedule. My health came back, just like the verse said, and I was able to run and not be weary and walk and not faint, and mount up with wings as eagles. The name of the camp was Eagle Lake. So it was not only a great experience, but it was obvious that God's fingerprints were all over it, and fulfilling that promise he made to me. Spent 4 summers at the boys camp, and 2 as counselor and 2 as program director. At different times and during the first 2 years, I taught canoeing, archery, riflery, map and compass. Most of them I'd never done. And so I got to do some things as an adult that I never got to do as a child. And I remember the first day I was at camp, the director took me down to the waterfront. So you're going to be the waterfront director here on the lake. And one of your responsibilities will be to teach canoeing. And I said, I've never been in a canoe. So he took me out and showed me the strokes and gave me a book. So the class started the next day. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I know some of these kids have done this before and whatnot. And, you know, you're tempted to try to bluff your way through. And I thought, that's not going to work. So I said, Lord, what should I do? And it was basically tell the truth. So the kids come in and I said, guys, how many of you have never been in a canoe? And several of them raised their hand. I said, well, I'm with you, or I'm one day up on you. So we're going to learn this together. Has anybody been done canoeing before? And a couple of them said, well, I'm going to need you guys to help me learn this stuff and teach it. And so that just took the pressure off. Well, the truth will set you free. Learned so many things about nurturing people. And I found out if you can communicate to kids, you can communicate to anybody. Because they're honest. They don't sit there with a dumb look or like they know what you're saying. They say, what does that mean? And so it was a great experience. You had kids that had health problems you had to take care of. So it was a real nurturing training experience. Well, I lived at the Navigator home before the experience and then after part of it. And the Navigators back then annually would have an East Coast conference in the western part of Virginia, a week-long conference. The first year I was there, I was sitting in the lobby, and a young lady walked through the door, and just not a raging beauty by any imagination, but boy, it was like, this is it. I mean, I used to scorn at this love at first sight, and I don't know if it's a principle, but it sure worked in my case. I knew that something was going on, something special. And so I made it a point to be near her during the conference, just to be in groups and whatnot. Earlier, I had run across in my quiet time Matthew 19, where God talks about eunuchs, and that some men are eunuchs by birth, some eunuchs made by other people, and eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs, like the Apostle Paul, who have made themselves eunuchs, single for the sake of the kingdom of God. And I thought, would God want me to be one of those? And I thought, I hope not. I mean, but I've never had much success with girls, but So maybe I am, but no, certainly not. I feel like I need a wife. So this could be talking about me. But the Lord kept, but would you, if you knew for sure God wanted you to, would you? And I struggled with that for months. And then finally I surrendered one time and said, okay, Lord, if you want me to be single the rest of my life, it's okay. I submit to that. Well, and then is when, shortly after that, when I went to the conference and saw this girl, that I thought, this is it. So, but I could remember another when she and some other girls came through, and I had another guy that had lived in the neighborhood home with me, living with me in Richmond, and she was in Washington, D.C. in the ministry there. And so they were coming, so I called up and said, why don't you and Larry come over and have lunch with us while we're on our way to wherever. And so I got to see her again. I got to go to another one-night rally where she was there, and just became excited every time. And I remember praying, Lord, I know the heart is deceitful of all things, desperately wicked. Who can know it? But again, if this is the one, you bring her to me. And I think part of it that I wasn't honest with myself about it was because I know how easy it is to jump ahead of the Lord. And so I said, you bring her to me. Well, next year, went back to boys camp, and a group came up from down at the conference and for a picnic. So I went over to see my boss, who brought the group up, and there she was. Out here with Colorado, up in the booties of the Colorado Rockies at a boys camp, and who should appear? So I thought, I think I've got some confirmation here. So I thought, as soon as I get back east and go to the East Coast Conference, I'm going to approach Jim White, who was the Navigator representative there, and she was living in his home, so that he'll know what's going on. So that was my goal. I pulled up, and I started walking toward the conference place and to register. And here comes Jim White with another guy coming down another walkway. So we kind of merged together, and I'm getting ready to say, I've got my little patter already, I'm going to say, Jim, I need to get some time with you as soon as you're available. And he said, Ken, I need to get some time with you when you're available. I thought, that's my line. So we got together, and I told Jim, I said, I have an interest in one of the girls in your area, and I wanted to check with you and just make sure she's not engaged or spoken for by somebody else or something. And he said, who is it? And I said, it's Marcia Texter. And no, I asked him, I said, who do you think it is? He said, Marcia Texter. And so I said, I perceive you're a prophet. Well, it turns out that she had already talked to him about me, but he didn't tell me that. So I'm still sweating bullets, just over how she's going to respond. So that evening I went up to her before the meeting, and I said, at his suggestion, would you like to take a ride with me? And she said, you mean after the meeting? I said, no, right now. I wanted to get this thing settled. So we took a ride. Skyline Drive was close by. I saw a little sign for waterfall. I thought, this will be perfect. They hike down a quarter of a mile and have that setting, and talked about how each had been praying about the other and so forth. And so that clicked, and some 3 or 4 months later we were married. Oh, and also at that meeting with Jim White, he asked me to come on the Navigator staff for the East Coast, which I did. And after we're married, we spent some time in Richmond, got a little small ministry going, and then was asked to go to Blacksburg, Virginia Tech, with a bigger ministry there, under the supervision of a guy who'd been around a lot longer. And that's what I did, and that was a great experience. Just going through the dormitory, sharing Christ, and helping guys with scripture memory and their walk with Christ. And during that time, I was involved in 2 summer programs. One was out in Nebraska, where the navigators had secured a deal with a pastor who owned a camp. And so we would give him a half a day's work, and then he would give us housing and food and programming space. And so I had a team of 6 or 8 guys, I can't remember. But I can remember praying. These were guys who had been saved during the previous school year, and the purpose of this program was to prepare them to go back to school for their second year, able to reach first year guys coming in and keep this thing going. And so one of the things I prayed for was that each one of them, because at the end of the program we were going to go on an evangelistic trip, and I knew that, so I was praying that each one would lead somebody to Christ, or at least get somebody to make a profession of faith. Because I know that once that happens, there's a hook there. Once God uses you in His enterprise of bringing people to Himself, you're hooked. And I thought if they could do that, this will be an anchor for them when they get back to school the next year. So at the end of the year, we went to in Colorado. It was kind of like Gatlinburg here in Tennessee. Estes Park, Colorado. Big tourist trip. Well, it was kind of a faith trip. We got there kind of not knowing where we were going to stay and whatever, and God provided some rough buildings to stay in and whatnot. And so it was kind of a faith experience and evangelistic trip together. So every one of the guys had somebody make a profession. And so we were a few hours from returning, and I thought, wait a minute, I've been so busy watching these guys or watching after them, I didn't have anybody make a profession. So, it's getting embarrassing, I'm more concerned about being embarrassed than eternity for people. But that was it. So I was desperate. So I went in, it was at the YMCA of the Rockies, that's there in Estes Park. Went into this huge, lobby or whatever, just furniture and whatnot. And this guy's sitting by himself, not much going on around him. And so I approached him, Ken Leary, and would you be interested in talking about spiritual things? No. And so I just continued to push a little bit because of my ego. And I was able to get the gospel to him. And then he started asking a bunch of stupid questions, and so I said, you need to put all this stuff aside. This is just flack, and just commit your life to Jesus Christ. Well, what about this? What you need to do is commit your life to Jesus Christ. Question, commit yourself. We were not communicating whatsoever. And all of a sudden, the guy, I could see, I tell people, I once saw a guy get saved. I saw it, his countenance and everything changed, and he just like, I got it. What I need to do is to put all this stuff aside and commit my life to Jesus Christ, and he did. I thought, it was like, he said it like he just thought of it. I thought, wait a minute, I've been saying this for 10 minutes. But so I had that privilege of seeing God do His thing. The other summer program was at Raleigh, North Carolina, at NC State, where we rented a fraternity house, and the students would work half a day, and we program in the afternoon and the evening. And so that was a lot of fun, taking new believers and just encouraging them in their faith and showing them what Christ had done for them and preparing them for the following school year. But while I was there at NC State, one of the big navigator guys came through, and he said, now, what's your goal for the summer? I said, basically to nurture these young believers and show them their resources in Christ as an anchor for their souls. Because I didn't have anything to prove at that point. A new bunch of navigators had come in with their own guys and said, we don't have any place for you. So I got fired from the navigators, I guess you could say. Of course, in the meantime, we had a baby, little girl, Melinda, and she lives in Nashville now with her family, and spent 7 years in Turkey as unofficial missionaries because of the attitude toward Christianity there. And it got pretty dangerous over there. So I encouraged him to come back, raise the kids, and then decide what to do. I got a call from the same guy that had challenged me on what my goal was. I got a phone call out of the blue from him, and he said, I remember you working at boys camp. And he said, Cal Farley Boys Ranch contacted me. They need a assistant chaplain. And so he gave me the number of the chaplain. So I called the guy, and he had been trained at Moody Bible Institute. And he said, this job will involve being the boys' choir director. He said, have you had any training in music? I said, no. Do you play instrument? No. Do you sing? No. You're hired. He had a high regard for the Navigators, and he had already made up his mind of it. So here I am, just having to learn how to lead songs and fake it, and whatnot. But how God had put me into situations where I had nothing. The teacher, the instructor of atomic demolitions, the boys camp, the canoe, almost everything at the boys camp I had never done, and I had to pray to God for ideas on how to make it more fun, because the canoe thing was a 2.5 hour period, and after about 30 minutes of the practicing the thing, I'm tired, I'm tired. And so I thought, I can't have these kids, paddling the canoe in class for 2.5 hours, so I thought, how can I make it fun? So I went to the kitchen, got some sponges, and so we were going to play tag. Well, it was magic, because when you're playing tag, you can paddle that canoe for hours and not get tired. So we did that. I made a course in the lake the way it was shaped to make a course where they would have to go through. I went to the kitchen, told the cook to save the Clorox bottles that they used in the rinse water, and made little boys, to plot off a course for them to practice the things. And then when we had the Olympics at the end, they had to go through that and so forth. Well, that was an idea that God gave me. Archery, after a while, you get tired of just shooting at the target. So I went to town and got some of the targets where they'd have a deer or bear or whatever, and you let them shoot at that. And just things like that to make it more fun for them. And God was just really gracious to give me ideas in response to the prayer, help! It's interesting, when we know that we're needy, we go to Him. But there's so many things when we're needy when we don't think we do. Well, I got fired from the group camp. I've been fired a lot. Basically for preaching to the boys about Jesus and get little Bible study started, and was told you can't talk to the boys about Jesus except in the chapel building on Sunday. And I thought, this is not going to work. But we were having Bible study with a guy who had come out there to be a plumber, but also his idea was to apprentice young men as plumbers, but also to apprentice them as believers, to have that kind of one-on-one influence all day, every day. Not all day, but half day. And so when he heard that what had happened to me, and we left and came here to Nashville and thought, we'll start our own children's home. But we weren't sure about it. I've never, this is the will of God. I've always struggled with that, and I thought, well, it seems like a good idea, and I think the Lord might be in it, but how can you be sure? And so I had been influenced by reading George Mueller, a man in England in the 19th century who had started orphanages to show that God is alive and well without doing any fundraising. And I thought that'd be a great idea. Let's do it. Let's go and do it by faith, and if God brings in the resources, we'll continue doing it. And if He doesn't bring in the resources without fundraising, then we'll stop doing it and do something else. It's just kind of the theory. If He wants it to happen, He can fund it. Now, this is not to knock any other method, but it was just what my thinking on this will be for sure that this is God's will. We lived in an antebellum mansion off of Murfreesboro Road. It's a bunch of trucking companies now. But it was a structure that was even more impressive than the outside of the Andrew Jackson's Hermitage, and bigger. A jeweler here in town, E.J. Sane, had bought it, owned it, and when his son came back from World War II, he had an addition built onto that. So it was actually two houses, 37 rooms, 7.5 bathrooms. People would come just to look at the place. And so we got tired of giving tours, so we thought, if we're going to take somebody through the house, they're going to get the gospel so that they can feel, because it was easy to say it on, here's why we're here, and here's why we're doing what we're doing, and what we're trying to do with the kids, and it just leads into the gospel. Well, during that time with the children's home, one of the older kids had gotten his driver's license, and my wife had taken him to the store to get some school supplies and letting him drive. And it was a stick shift. He thought he was in first gear, making a left turn. He was in third gear and was just putting along when a big truck hit him. He survived, but my wife did not. So I got a call from the policeman, and he said, your wife has been involved in a serious accident and is at General Hospital. And so I jumped in the car and headed out, and I said to myself, now, don't be a nut and drive 80 miles an hour and kill yourself or somebody else, because it ain't going to matter how fast you get there. You're not going to be able to see her probably for a while. And then this overwhelming feeling came over me. I'm not much of a mystic, but this was very mystical, because I made no conscious effort to open my mouth, but I heard myself saying, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And a peace came over me. And of course, by the time I got to the hospital, she had passed. I felt like to continue in this kind of thing, I needed a wife, I can't raise. We had the two families, 21 kids. We had 11. The other family had 9. I had taken my kids to my sister's house in New York for a vacation and visit. You don't get many invitations to come stay with folks when you got 11 kids, but my sister, as I got back, the other couple was telling me that a young lady came by who was involved with Campus Crusade and was there to pick up the kid that had been in the accident. They got to talking, and she mentioned 18 things that she was praying for a husband. And she said, they said, she described you. And I said, well, that's great, but, and that she was going to go out to California to Campus Crusade headquarters and go through IBS. Quit her job to do that, and took a step of faith, and hoping to go on staff with Campus Crusade. She was turned down, was devastated because she'd given up her job and everything to do this. And so in discouragement, she came back to Nashville with her parents, and I didn't know anything about that. So when they were telling me all about her, I said, well, she's out in California, and I'm not going out there, so Lord, you're going to have to bring her to me if she's the one. So later, there's a guy in my Sunday school class, Wesley Womack, and I found out about a thing that Campus Crusade was putting on how to share your faith in a public school setting. I thought this would be perfect for Wesley. So I took Wesley to the thing. Susan has a sister who was involved with Campus Crusade that Wesley had told me about. He was kind of sweet on. And so we entered the place, and Wesley kind of puts her and said, there she is. And I thought it was the sister. So we sat down across, and I said, don't you have a sister in California? And she said, no, that's me. And so again, bring her to me, and there she is. And so God provided again. I wonder whether to share with you our farm experience when we're up the way home, and after my first wife died, things were tough. they doubled the rent on us, and we couldn't do it. We decided to go to two directions. And so I told the other couple that they should keep the ministry going, and we'd go out and start something else. So we're praying every morning. We get together in a little breakfast nook and pray. And so while we're praying and one of the big things we're praying for was a place for us to go to. They had already secured a place. So there was a wall phone right behind me, and the phone rang. And I thought, every time you start to pray, the phone rings. So I answered the phone. This is Ken Leary. Hey, how would you like a farm with 265 acres, a house, and a horse barn? I said, are you kidding me? So he put me in touch with a real estate agent, Kip Caudell. And I met with him, and he was a young Christian, and he had owned this property and was selling it to some developer. They had asked him when they were making the deal, do you want to keep that house on it? They didn't have planned to develop it for 3 to 5 years. So he said, they're fine if you want to use it for up to 3 to 5 years for free. But he said they had asked, do you want to keep that house? And I said yes. And afterwards I thought, why did I say that? I had no earthly use for that house. It had those old asphalt shingles on it, but it was a nice house. Perfect for the kids. It was, if you've ever seen the old TV program Green Acres, that was my Green Acres experience, old city boy trying to be a farmer. And we had horses and cattle and chickens. And by the way, if you ever buy baby turkeys, somebody gave us a dozen baby turkeys. First time it rained, we go out in the morning and they're all laying dead on the ground. I'm thinking, what is the deal? So I called the guy up and said, what, did you give me some diseased turkey? What is it? They're dead. They're laying on the ground, dead in the mud. He said, I forgot to tell you. This is what, when you think somebody's stupid, you call them a turkey. This is why. When it rains, the baby turkeys look up with their mouth open and drown. You've got to put them up somewhere when it rains until they get older. Reminds me of us before God reaches down into our lives. Well, during that time, my dad had, his Alzheimer's had begun to get worse, and my mom just couldn't deal with it. And she didn't know what to do. And I was talking to her on the phone. I said, Mom, boy, I admit, but I just can't dump what I'm doing. But if you bring Pop up here and Grandma, we can help you out. So she sold the house. First people looked at it, bought it. She moved up. We got a double wide trailer and put it there on the acreage. So when we did the double wide, we moved in with them so we could help them. So we had 2 places. There was a block house, city block house, down on the other part of the property. So there's 2 couples that we're doing Bible study with, and we invited them to come and live in those 2 houses. And we had a little fellowship there, and it even had a little home church thing, and had a few other folks with us, and that was a fun time. But that was the same deal, just part 2 of the faith ministry, and just how God provided clothes. And I told people I had a tuxedo. I didn't have anywhere to wear it, but I had a tuxedo. One of Susan's friends had friends that were compulsive clothes buyers, and they would hand down stuff that they'd never worn even. But God provided so many ways. Little Davis Dairy up in Goodlettsville provided milk and dairy products for us, and it was just amazing to see God, His faithfulness in fulfilling His promises. Again, hanging around with good people. I was in a Bible study after the farm. The time was up, and we moved kind of to Jolton, Goodlettsville area, and I had gotten a job with the state, and we're involved with a Bible study, and found out that one of the couples were house parents at a state group home, and they had lost their director, and said, "Was that something you'd like to do?" I said, "Well, yeah, I'd like to check that out." Long story short, I got the job as group home director for the Department of Corrections, and had teenage boys. And it was there after a while that some volunteers, when I needed relief house parents, said, "We've got a guy for you. His problem right now, he's still in prison." And it turned out to be Carl Carlson. and he was on like work release or whatever, and I interviewed him several times, and Karen, and turned out to be a great decision. He was probably the best I have ever seen at working with boys. He was like the Pied Piper. He could get away with things that others couldn't. Had to rein him in some, but like I say, I put up with some things that because he was just so good. And that began our love-hate relationship that lasted for a number of years. I always said we were the odd couple, but made a pretty good team. So he left the group home, finished his education, a master's degree, and started YCAP, which was a marriage between a YMCA and his own working with kids at the juvenile detention center. In YCAP, he designed it pretty much was at the group home was somewhat of a prototype of the YCAP program, except for it was not residential. After some years there, he burned out, had some issues, and left YCAP. But they were gracious and gave him a year's salary, so he was not pressured into getting a job right away. And so I encouraged him to go out to Percy Priest Lake with his Bible and some coffee and just spend some time praying, getting in touch with the Lord, and seeking guidance. He wanted me to come out there with him at least a couple of times a week. So I'd go out there a couple of times with him, and we'd talk about what if. And he was discouraged, talked about getting his truck driver's license again and doing that, but I knew God had more than that for him. We had a couple of his friends, volunteers from YCAP, that came out and did Bible study with us once a week. And during those times, I got the idea to get people that knew and loved Carl together. He didn't even remember this in his latter days. But I split them into two groups, which was a pretty large group, and asked them not to talk among themselves. That would just get independent from each group. Well, so I met with this group, and I met with this group, and it was unanimous on both groups that he should go into prison ministry. And I was not terribly thrilled at the outset, but it was clear, I think, that's to do. So we went out to the reception center in PRC and began with a discipleship emphasis and started with some one-on-ones and small groups, and now the rest is history, I guess, where God gave us men like the guy behind the camera here, Marsh Martin, is the poster boy for Men of Valor. In those early days, I met a young man named Kurt Campbell, and the Lord spoke to my heart that this was a guy to replace Carl down the road. Actually, Carl interviewed him early on, and he turned it down. But Kurt is kind of reforming things, getting things on the right track. And so after 20-some years, I wrote this down. Now here we are on the threshold of growth based on carefully planting and watering over the last years. And I want to read you a passage that I think is significant for Men of Valor. From Isaiah 58, is not this the fact that I chose? To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke. Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover him, and not to hide yourself from your own flesh. Then shall your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up speedily. Your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and he will say, Here am I. If you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing of a finger and speaking wickedness, if you pour out yourself for the hungry, and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then shall your light rise in the darkness, and your gloom be as the noonday. And the Lord will guide you continually, and satisfy your desire in scorched places, and make your bones strong, and you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters do not fail. And your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations, and you shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to dwell in. So then, as Paul said in Galatians 6, let us not grow weary in well-doing, for in due time we shall reap if we faint not. And now I want to do a brief epilogue. As John wrote toward the end of his gospel, he said, and many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life through his name. Well, the things that I've selected to share had that intention, is that God is not a respecter of persons. He will do these sorts of things and more for any that will put their trust in his promises. And one caveat that I want to make clear, that God doesn't always work the same way with everybody. So things that God has done with me over the years is not what I'm saying should happen to everybody. I think God is pleased to provide in many ways. With Elijah, he fed him with the ravens and then led him to the poor widow's house. So when you look back on your life, you will see that God's fingerprints on your life that you were not aware of at the time. So in Romans 11:33, I'll leave this with you. Oh, the depths of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and his ways past finding out. God bless.